Have you ever cracked open a company's annual report and just your eyes glaze over? It's just pages and pages of numbers and text. It can be a lot. So today, we're going to demystify the whole thing. We're going to figure out how to read an annual report, not with a textbook, but by digging into the real story of one company's pretty dramatic first year on the stock market. All right, let's get into it. Okay, so our case study here is a shipping company, PT Chakra Buana Resources Energy, or just CBRE for short. Now, the key thing you need to know is that 2023 wasn't just any old year for them. It was their big debut. This was their very first year as a publicly traded company. And that means, for the first time ever, everything they did was out in the open, under the microscope of investors, the market, everyone. And wow, what a first year it was. So on January 9th, boom, they go public with their IPO, raising a bunch of cash. And they did not waste any time putting it to work. By November, they're signing a deal for a huge new ship. We're talking a 57,000 deadweight ton bulk carrier. That's basically the max weight of cargo, fuel, everything the ship can carry. Huge. And to top it all off, they lock in a massive 10-year contract with a key partner. So this is not a company that's just sitting back and counting its money. They are making big, bold moves right out of the gate. So you hear about all those big moves, and the next logical question is, okay, but how did they actually do? How did they perform? Well, for that, we've got to turn to the numbers, the company's official scorecard for the year. And, when you first look at them, the story seems, well, incredible. The first thing that just jumps right off the page is this, revenue growth of almost 30%. They hit over 42 billion rupiah. For a company in its very first year, that is seriously impressive stuff. It makes you think demand is strong, operations are humming. I mean, if you stopped reading the report right here, you'd probably think it was a massive success story. But, and this is maybe the most important lesson when you're reading one of these reports, you can never, ever stop at the headline number. Revenue is awesome, but it is not the whole story. You have to ask that next critical question. Yeah, but did they actually make any money? And here's the plot twist. Just look at the gap between what they hoped for and what actually happened. Okay, sure, they missed their revenue target, but look at the net profit. Their target was over 29 billion rupiah. What they actually made was just 904 million. That's barely 3% of their goal. So the huge question is, what on earth happened here? To find out why, you have to dig deeper. You've got to get past the numbers and into the narrative parts of the report. This is where the leadership team, the people in charge, get to tell their side of the story, to give some context for those pretty shocking results. And their first explanation is a classic one. You could say they blamed the weather, the economic weather, that is. The Board of Commissioners points right at continuing global economic uncertainty. This is basically them telling investors, hey, there were huge forces out there, totally outside of our control, that made this a really tough year to do business. But they don't just stop at blaming the economy. They try to reframe the entire story. They essentially argue that the terrible profit number wasn't a failure. It was a deliberate choice. They're saying they decided to sacrifice short-term profits for a much bigger prize down the road, long-term growth and stability. And this right here explains their whole strategy. Remember that giant ship they bought? Well, they paid for it with a massive loan, up to 150 billion rupiah. And when you take on that much debt, you've got huge interest payments, right? And that is what absolutely crushed their profit margin for 2023. But from their perspective, it was a necessary bet. They see a growing demand for domestic coal transport, and they believe that with this brand new ship and that 10-year contract, they've just positioned themselves to own that market for years and years to come. An annual report is about way more than just the money. It also gets into what people call ESG, that stands for environmental, social, and governance. It's basically how the company is impacting the world around it. So let's check out CBRE's social scorecard. How'd they do with their people and their community? Now, first things first, this is a really small company. We're talking just 10 employees in 2023. But what's kind of interesting is the mix. 60% of their workforce is female. It's a small detail for sure, but it gives you a little peek into the company's culture. Okay, this, however, is not a small detail. For any company in an industry like shipping, safety is everything. So the fact that they went the entire year with 0 work-related fatalities, that's a huge deal. It's a critical performance metric, and it tells you their management team is taking safety very, very seriously. And beyond safety, the report lays out their commitment to being a good corporate citizen. They've got a formal code of conduct and had no violations. They have a whistleblowing system so employees can report issues safely, and they were involved in their local community, making donations. These are really the basic building blocks of a responsible company. So, after we've looked at the past year, the money, the strategy, the social side of things, the last piece of the puzzle is to look ahead. What does the report tell us about the risks and the opportunities that are on the horizon for them? When you lay it all out, you get this really balanced scorecard. On one side, you've got some incredible strengths, that strong revenue growth, a big, bold investment in the future, a long-term contract that gives them stability, and a perfect safety record. But on the other side of the ledger, the challenges are just as big. That massive profit miss, a balance sheet that's now loaded with debt, a business that's super dependent on the volatile coal market, and of course, that same uncertain global economy they started with. And that, right there, is the real secret to reading an annual report. It's not just a history book telling you what happened last year. It's a blueprint for the future. CBRE has laid out its story for investors. It's a story of a huge gamble, sacrificing today's profit for a shot at tomorrow's dominance. And the only question that really matters now is, will the bet pay off? Well, for that answer, I guess we'll just have to wait for next year's report.